Welcome, everybody. This is the July edition of the You Already Own It Cloud Community Call. Thanks for joining. Very excited um, for the session we're going to have this month. We're going to focus on Azure Security Center. We have a special guest, Dennis Guzzi, Director of Cloud Strategy for Microsoft SLG, to join us as well to give some of his insights. We'll be co-presenting with Dennis. Very excited to have a long relationship with Dennis professionally and personally, and a privilege to have him join us on this month's call. So just really quickly, we're gonna have our overview of Azure Security Center. A lot of really new and cool things to talk about there. We're gonna have our security corner with Jeff Fowler. He's going to talk about conditional access, and then we're gonna open things up to open mic questions, both on topic or any other questions as well related to Microsoft Cloud. So a couple of housekeeping items. Remember, You Already Own It team. That's myself, Bob Ballard, Jerry Martin, Aaron Ward, and George Scott. Together, we are the Planet Cloud Strategist team, that group. We also have, I think, close to 70 years of ex-Microsoft experience on this team. So we are very familiar with the platform. Feel free to make sure you reach out to your You Already Own It team. By the link I will tell you on the next slide. We also have Mary Tucker, who keeps us all in line, make sure we keep our commitments, and Steve Winter, our Vice President, whose vision for this, for the You Already Own It community is his. So really quickly, again, a reminder, and we talked about this a little bit last month, but I want to make sure everyone's aware. The Planet You Already Own It team is offering what we're calling our cloud service packs, which basically is updates on what we think are the most critical stories, features, functionality, blog posts, whatever they might be for our customers to understand what's going on, whether it's new functionality, changes in functionality, or just really insightful pieces around the technology. This is going out every month in the newsletter. We're also currently working on other delivery methods for this information as well. It's completely curated by the team. We gather it every month, and each month we get together and say, okay, what are the top ones that we need to make sure everyone sees, and that's what makes it into the curated list. So as I said before, don't forget to reach out to us at any time. It's at youalreadyownit@go-planet.com. That email will get your Planet Cloud Strategist team of George, Aaron, Jerry, and myself, along with a few others, to make sure that we respond to you. Our goal is to respond to everybody within 24 hours, at least with a, hey, I need to look into that. But if you have questions, concerns, issues, whatever you need, please feel free to reach out to your alias. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dennis Guzzi, who is the Director of Cloud Strategy for Microsoft SLG, to kick off our session around Azure Security Center and a little bit of Azure overall as well. Go ahead, Dennis.
Great. Thank you, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to jump on the call today. So as Bob mentioned, my name is Dennis Guzzi. I may have spoken with some of you as customers in the past, but just some background about me. Before joining Microsoft over 10 years ago, I spent almost 10 years in state government. So I bring a lot of public sector background, public sector experience to the types of conversations that I deliver on a day-to-day basis. And I'm just going to talk briefly, because Bob's going to talk quite a bit about the Security Center components, but I want to talk a little bit about what our approach is as it relates to Security Center, and really providing you the ability from an Azure perspective to make sure that you have a secure and, most importantly, well-managed cloud experience, specifically, again, as we're going to talk about today with Azure and your own data center. So cloud adoption is really transforming the way public sector customers do business, but it's also presenting a lot of challenges related to IT security and management. And Azure actually has a bunch of great tools that help customers effectively address those challenges. A lot of the customers that I work with, and I focus with customers specifically in state and local government, their business units and developers are leveraging our cloud technologies to drive innovation, drive agility, and they're seeing great results, which we love. But what we're also seeing is cloud security and management isn't always the top of mind thing that they're thinking about, and in many cases, unfortunately, is often an afterthought. So that will potentially increase that organization's exposure to unnecessary risks inside the cloud. So Azure actually has technologies and enables our customers to get better visibility and control over the cloud environments they have to start to minimize those risks. And while they're, again, allowing their business units, their developers and such to continue all that great innovation. As these organizations face these security threats, whether it's on premises or in the cloud, the main way to keep up with that threats is to, in my opinion, is to stay competitive by leveraging the cloud to not only allow you to drive that innovation, but also to allow you to drive that security. Microsoft, as an organization, has over 3,500 security professionals that work day and night to make sure our customers have a secure cloud infrastructure. And our Azure environment provides additional tools that you're able to leverage to protect you while you're using our platform. And I just want to, again, this goes without saying, but cloud environments are dynamic. And the value of our customers using something like Azure, for example, is you can spin up cloud resources very quickly, spin them down very quickly based on the things you need to do, or whether you're meeting some seasonal or operational requirements or things like that. And in doing so, at the core, again, you start to see instances where that security is an afterthought. So what we're trying to do, and what you'll see in things like Security Center, is the ability to leverage the cloud to start focusing on, agile development and agile enablement of things like infrastructure and code and things like that, and being able to drive this through not only the development and mindset as you start to transform to the cloud, but also in the way that you deliver secure cloud services. And if we can go to the next slide, Bob. To that end, I wanted to make sure I talked, briefly about, and this is where we'll really start to drive into a little bit about the value of what Bob's going to get into with Azure Security Center. It's a joint responsibility between Microsoft and you as the customer to give you the most secure capabilities in the cloud. So Microsoft, from our commitment, the things that we're doing, we are doing things to specifically secure your physical assets in the cloud. So we've got multiple layers of physical protection, from the perimeter to the buildings, the computer rooms, the state-of-the-art security controls as you'd imagine, the things like video coverage, biometric authentication, verified single-person entry, things like that are, in our environments. Provisioning and maintenance of all the hardware is done by Microsoft resources. From a data center operations perspective, we have a security operations center that's 24/7, 24/7, 365. We have continuous monitoring by those security experts that I talked to you about a moment ago. And just as important from a cloud infrastructure perspective, we deliver, whether you're in our commercial, cloud, our government cloud, it's a secure multi-tenancy environment where we've got strong, defense and denial of service defense systems in place, where we do data segregation, we do encryption, but there's also that joint responsibility that exists with you as a customer. And you have a responsibility to have some level of control of things like your virtual machines, like your applications, your workloads, and the data that you're storing in our cloud to make sure it's secure and well managed. So we do provide a variety and lots of different tools to make that easy for you to be able to secure and manage those cloud resources. And we're going to move to the next slide, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about exactly what those capabilities are and what we deliver. So our Azure environment, what we give you in Azure, and you'll see there's some different components or different pillars we're going to talk about. There are really 5 areas of security and management. We have that secure pillar where Azure is a trusted and secure platform. You as a customer do have to bring your own security settings and the requirements that you have, and whether they be legal or policy driven, that you have to be bring to the cloud, and you need to be able to protect your individual machines and your workloads against threats and be able to monitor and the security posture of those items in the environment. We also need to make sure you're able to protect your virtual machines and your applications in the cloud. They need to be backed up. They need to be protected in the event of data loss or, disaster recovery or things where, a user or an admin deletes a server and you need to be able to get that data back, things like that. You need to have, components and controls in place to be able to monitor your environment. So your operations managers, your developers can see the health and performance of their applications, their infrastructure, the network, et cetera. You need to have the ability to configure, obviously, building all those hybrid and hyper workloads at scale, have things like automation and configuration to automate some of these components, but just as important, automate things like security into your overall process. And lastly, and anybody who's ever heard me talk before, or I've done a bunch of webcasts before, I am a huge fan of governance. From a governance perspective, customers need a way to look at all those resources you have in that hybrid world that we, most of our especially our public sector customers live in, to be able to have standards and policy compliance across the board from a security and management perspective. And what Bob is going to talk to you about specifically is something called Azure Security Center. And Azure Security Center is one of those great technologies that not a lot of people realize exists and is available for them. And Azure Security Center actually gives you the ability to get full visibility into your entire cloud security state with a single unified view, which I can't tell you how critical that is for admins and for developers to have a single view to get access to this information. But what we do in Security Center is we collect data, security data from multiple sources, things like firewalls, things like partner solutions. And we're not just talking about Microsoft technologies here. So we're talking about if you have technologies from Trend Micro, from Symantec, from Commvault, Veritas, Splunk, et cetera, that are out there, we can connect and access that data and give you that single pane of glass. We can create things and integrate into things like security workflows. We can create onboarding processes for cloud resources to ensure that when new resources are discovered in your Azure subscriptions, that we're applying certain levels of security. We're doing things like continuous security assessments, where we're monitoring the security of things like your virtual machines, your networks, et cetera, and evaluating and providing you dashboards to give you insights into any security potential holes or vulnerabilities that might exist. We have things like compliance reporting, because all these technologies are great, and and again, reporting is one of those things. As a former government employee, I know that sometimes to justify the value and cost of something, you need to be able to report, what did this help me accomplish? What is this helping me ensure and secure? So we have deep compliance reporting in there. There's a couple things, though, that are also really important, and Bob's going to show you some of these things or talk about some of these things in his presentation, where we talk about things like doing proactive security assessments. So evaluating, instances and things you're building out there and providing you options and abilities to remediate those. So we don't just tell you what's wrong. We give you actionable recommendations on how to solve and resolve the issue. We also have something called adaptive application control. So we can start talking about blocking malware and applications by whitelisting certain things based on workloads and processes that you want to enable. In fact, we just actually today released a blog post and a blog out there about some great updates to this adaptive application control process. But it's really about making sure that only the things that you want running on your virtual machines, for example, running in Azure, are running. That makes sure that even if somehow you allow a virtual machine to be attacked, or you open something up, or there's a phishing attempt, you can still make sure that it's only opening certain applications. And there's a lot more that's in there, from extensive threat intelligence and advanced threat detection that allows you to use behavioral analytics and Microsoft's machine learning in our intelligence security graph, where we're getting trillions, and I emphasize that word, trillions of signals from Microsoft services, systems, and users around the globe, and doing things like giving you tools for investigations and some additional capabilities from contextual threat analysis and things like that. So I know I've talked a lot about setting up what Bob's going to talk about with Security Center. I'm going to be on throughout the call as well as at the end if there's any open-ended questions. And I appreciate you guys giving me an opportunity to set up Bob's great discussion here on Azure Security Center.
Thank you, Dennis. And now I don't have to actually do my presentation. So thank you very much, very much for that. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to get a little more in depth in all of those topics, right? So there's really three pillars, and Dennis sort of alluded to him when he was sort of rattling it off. And by the way, you can hear sort of the passion for the technology that Dennis has for this particular topic, which is why I really wanted to bring him on. So take advantage of that when it comes to questions, et cetera, towards the end. But really, we kind of break these down into three pillars. Microsoft loves to break things into pillars, but I actually don't mind, and sort of been indoctrinated in that way of thinking as well, because it really helps sort of understand what the categories of things are. So number one, we need to, have unified visibility and control. And a couple of things to point out, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is not only, as Dennis mentioned, your own Azure environment and other third-party products, but on premises as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Having adaptive threat protection, right? So actually taking action based on the information through recommended steps right out of the tool, right? So part of the problem with a lot of these security tools is they tell you something's wrong, and that, which is great, right? Hey, this is going on. What this tool can also do is say, this is going on. This is the priority of those things that are going on. And this is what you need to do to target those priority incidents, right? And that's really, really important. And, talking about this intelligence detection and response sort of goes into that as well. So on the visibility and control side, right? So what we're talking about is, so by the way, a couple of other things, right? So Azure Security Center, so number one, was just made available in preview mode for the government tenants recently, right, in the last week or so. And so that's a huge thing. You got a lot of folks that did know about it, have been asking about it. And if you didn't know about it because it wasn't available for our government customers and their tenants, then this is going to sound really new to you. Not all the technologies, however, as part of this are new. Some of these are a series of sort of isolated one-off things that have been around for a while that have been aggregated. There is a bunch of brand new stuff, and we're going to talk about that too, but I just want to make sure you're going to see some things and you're like, that looks a lot like OMS log analytics. Well, that's because it is. But now it's sort of rolled up into a single view, one product under an umbrella. So the cool thing here is that, this is all built into Azure. You don't need to set this up. You just go into the portal, go into the security center and start working with, setting up the parameters and configurations, turn on auto configuration if you want, and it just starts working. Some other things to note, and then Dennis is going to talk about this a little bit, is not, some of the pieces of this story are free, right? So you can actually get comfortable and familiar with this without actually incurring charges. And we'll talk a little bit about where some of those lines go. And like I said, I think Dennis is going to round us off at the end and talk about that as well. It's, as I mentioned before, gaining access, insight to hybrid resources. Servers that are not yet migrated or will never be migrated to Azure can be included in this analytics, right? I think that's really important because, there's a nice, if you look down here on the left-hand pane for participants, if you have that pane open, there's a lot of folks there. Many of them are in organizations that are never going to be fully in the cloud, or certainly not anytime soon. So it's really important to sort of understand that I can use one tool to be looking at these things. Centralizing policy management, right? So this part is really key. So one of the things that I think is really confusing and difficult for customers to say, okay, I have a couple of different kinds of security policies, and I want to apply them blanketly to groups of servers. Well, I can actually target these policies per my Azure subscription. And I also can say, I can have a single policy that goes across multiple Azure subscriptions. So let's just say I do have one policy and this is my baseline and I want this applied to everything. That's great. We can do that easily. I also can say this organization or group or this type of resource or asset gets targeted with different security policies and have them applied, and it's really easy to manage in that way. So, get the information from Azure Security Center, the integrated log analytics, right? So I know many of you that were on a lot of these that have been around for a long time, have been joining these community calls for a long time. No, we did a great session on OMS log analytics. Colin did a demo. That's included as part of this solution. That is sort of part of the free base foundation. So that didn't go away. It just got a name change. But now it's just better integrated into the overall admin experience. I just say I want it turned on. It gets turned on, and I can start correlating information from the logs of all these servers to be looking at measurable security elements, as well as things around reliability, uptime, and all of those things as well. And there's a whole bunch of out of the box sort of I'll call them widgets, ways to slice and dice the data and look at them. But I also can build my own, right? If I want to group things together, or I have certain correlations that are important to me and my business, I can make my own as well. And the great thing is that this is personalized by user, right? So we can have a default configuration, but we can also have the security folks may be looking at things differently than the operational folks may be looking at differently than the architects and engineers, right? And so I can slice and dice this and have this look the way that works best for my group. So the other really important thing here is this is integrated into a lot of things, right? So we talked about integrating into other anti-malware solutions, other third-party firewalls, all of those things, as long as they sort of follow standards and practices around the common event format, we can suck them in, right? And the big ones already sort of have common methodologies and analytics built in around them, right? So if we recognize, hey, that's a Cisco firewall sending logs, we know how to correlate that and do analytics on it. It also integrates into Azure Active Directory information protection and advanced threat analytics, right? Things that you're getting with, your M365 subscriptions that can also be brought in there. I mean, the key here is advanced threat analytics is more about your perimeter network than it is about your cloud network. And obviously that's an important part of the attack vector here, right? So we can incorporate those things as well. So the next pillar here is, the adaptive threat prevention, right? Which is, how do we take action and adapt and identify and mitigate the risks to reduce your exposure, right? So we're getting continuing assessments of networks, Azure services, your various machines, both on-premise and off, including those resources that we talked about, perimeter networks, all of those things as well, right? There are hundreds of built-in assessments already, things, looking for denial of service attacks, other kinds of assessments, et cetera. And we can fix vulnerabilities quickly, right? So I can prioritize these, take actionable recommendations. So here's where we get a little bit into the difference between what comes for free and what comes at a cost, right? So the free services is I can get information, right? The things that cost money are, okay, I can help you analyze that information, prioritize that information, and make recommended actions, right? So an absolutely critical step as part of the process, because this is where it breaks down. We're really good at gathering information in most customers. We're not as good as at sort of correlating it, prioritizing it, and taking the remediation actions as needed. One other thing on that point. So, essentially, when we look at these reports, it will say, it will point, a various assessment will give you, hey, here are some machines that have issues. Here's a prioritization of that issue. Click here for the recommended remediation steps. Click here to do them if it's something that can be executed from the portal. And much like Secure Score, I think we did a session on that as well before. It sort of takes you from here's what we say you should do. Here's the machines that are affected by it, and here are the steps to do it. Click this button. Let's just do it. Let's fix them, right? This is probably my favorite new feature and one of the most powerful. And I think when Dennis lists, his priorities, I think this might be on that list. So this might be on that list. So with just-in-time access to virtual machines, what we can say is, depending on your workflow, is to create a workflow that says, I want to access a machine through RDP, right? Until somebody says approves it, then you can't have access. Now, if I'm a global admin, the if I'm a global admin, I can self-approve. That might be something you decide to want to let do, so you don't get in the way of people doing their jobs. But depending on my role, I might need someone to approve, or a second party, or whatever you decide to do. And it only grants access for a limited time. What this means is I can make these machines available to be remotely administered by the people that need to. But I only allow it when I need it to happen, and it's only and then I can close that away so that I don't have those attack vectors for other external parties to try to access. This is incredibly powerful functionality, and really can significantly lock down machines. So Dennis mentioned this about the application whitelisting, right? So, if we know enough about our environment, we can actually say, here are the only applications that are allowed to run, right? And obviously that takes a little bit of work on the front end of this. But what it means is if I know all the applications that are running on a machine that I think should be allowed, I can whitelist those applications across a broad set of machines. And that way, if anything does find its way in, does want to get into trouble, does want to do anything like that, then it's going to, it's not going to be able to run, even if it does, for some reason, get through all the other layers of defense that you have. So from an intelligent detection and response, taking these analytics, one of the most powerful things about going to the Microsoft cloud is the ability, so people talk about, so what do I, how is this different than my data center? And, we often talk about, hey, you can still do this, you can still do that. It's just like your data center. Well, if it's just like your data center, why am I doing it? One of the reasons why you're stepping forward and going towards the Microsoft cloud is to leverage things that you can't get in your own data center. And what you can't get in your own data center is, the artificial intelligence and analytics that are running in the background, looking across not only your environment, but thousands and thousands and millions of environments to make to go ahead and make choices and learn about what's going on in the environment. Apologize for the dogs barking in the background. So, taking a look at finding what our anomalies are going on, right? What's different what seems out of the ordinary based on historical information, right? Look for known patterns and malicious behaviors. So we did a session not that long ago about our Fish Hunter product. And that's sort of the idea of, hey, if I access from a remote environment, and I also make an Outlook rule in close proximity to that, that's a known attack vector, right? So let's take action based on that. Then we can, combine the events from alerts across this and kill the activity in various stages, right? Again, this also integrates with other partners, other partner solutions, as well as firewall, anti-malware, et cetera. Taking all this information from all these actors across the global perspective and allowing a global view of what's happening to all the environments to trickle down into yours. So if we look at this, we can hit in the target attack phase of the kill chain, right? Whether we're talking about the inbound brute force attacks, application denial of service attacks, right? Then we move on to the install and exploit, looking at in-memory malware, suspicious execution, all of those things, all the way to post-breach. Hey, I didn't catch those for some reason in the first two pieces, but these other things, like I'm talking to, known bad malicious IPs or suspicious ones, et cetera, other behaviors that are likely to let me know that there was a breach. So I alluded to this a little bit. How do we focus on, so this is tons and tons of information. How do I make sure that I am focused on the things that I'm most worried about? So one of the things that's really important is when it says there's a threat, it doesn't just say, here are all the bad stuff. It says, here is all the bad stuff, right? But that here's all the bad stuff, but in a prioritization. These are the things you should be most worried about, right? So, and here are things you can step, here is things that are early in the kill chain. Here are things that are later in the kill chain. So if they're later in the kill chain, you may already have some sort of breach and take action on, etc. So, the important thing about working, with a global partner like Microsoft and having global data centers all over the world is you can take threats that are occurring in other parts of the world that have not even found their way to the United States yet, and analyze those and trigger those, trigger that information into the pool of analytics that we have to say, this hasn't happened here, but it's happening over there. So let's start thinking about, these correlating activities and taking action on them. So we can quickly assess the scope and impact of an attack, right? Because if I have all the pieces and parts of my puzzle, from perimeter network, from the individual machines, from log on activity, all of those things, I can quickly understand this is a specific attack to one machine, this is a large scale attack. I can understand what those are. And then a really important one is, I can automate and orchestrate these security workflows. Again, those that attended our former Fish Hunter session, that's the whole basis of that, which is take all this information. If I know that there's a breach and I know how to stop it, I can actually say, if this thing happens and that thing happens, do this automatically. And I can just notify the security team that you've done it. And with new technologies that have come to Azure in recent months, right, I can do things like I can shut down an account's access, but only its access from outside of my known network, right? So it used to be, hey, if these things are happening, I'll lock the account. Well, what if it's my, CEO and he's getting ready to do the most important, or, it's the governor and they're getting ready to walk into an important press briefing, right? I need access to my stuff, right? So if I see behaviors, maybe it's coming from an external source. We see this, hey, somebody's trying to log into the governor's account and they're coming from Malaysia, or, insert bad place for things to come from here. We can look at that and say, I'll lock down just the external access to that account, but I'll let the governor still go. And then, we'll send a note that we're going to investigate to see if there was a breach in his or her account. Before we go to Jeff, Dennis, I just wanted to give it back to you for a second if you had any, kind of closing things you wanted to share with the team.
I did, and I appreciate the chance to do that. I think there are a couple lessons, at least, that I always try to drive home, and I think Bob did a great job of helping drive those home. For me, whenever I talk about Security Center, whenever I'm working with customers on talking about, creating a secure, well-managed environment, lesson one from this is, Bob mentioned it early on in his part of the presentation. It's free. And I mean, I spent 10 years in government. I used to have a saying at the Attorney General's office in PA where I worked, if it's free, it's for me. So start by getting visibility. By turning it on at no cost to you, you get visibility into recommendations and things like that. And if by doing that, it enables you to kind of get an idea of where's my baseline, where am I starting at? And then from there, in terms of, from cost and creating the orchestrations and workflows and all these other things that you can do, start with that baseline. This should be enabled by default in your Azure environment, should be enabled against any virtual machines you're running in that environment, specifically because at a minimum, you at least get some visibility and can decide whether or not there's additional value in creating some of that orchestration. Number two, Bob mentioned it, and I have to highlight it again. This applies to not just services running in Azure, but things you're running on-premise. In fact, when Microsoft is helping and working with customers during an actual incident response, when you see these attacks that make the news and like the cities of Atlanta and things like that, we deploy this technology both internally and externally. We focus on the services and servers not just running in the cloud, but servers that are running on-premise. The third lesson is this is super powerful. Bob's presentation just gave you a very light scratch of the surface of the deep capabilities that you can do here in terms of being able to figure out exactly what's happening inside that environment. And it is super, super powerful. Everything from process injections to like the way commands are executed, but you're also getting that, and again, Bob touched on it, that threat intelligence that we have, including our own intelligence, because Microsoft typically sits at the top of either the most attacked or in the top 3 of most attacked companies in the world. So all that intelligence we gather from people trying to do bad things to us is able to get leveraged in these processes. The fourth lesson is, and again, it was in one of those final slides that Bob talked about, that visibility from an investigation perspective to quickly give you a visual view of how serious this incident is and how contained or not this incident is. And he had that screenshot up, and that investigation capability allows you to see, let's say somebody did a failed brute force attack trying to, attack a server, or if they were successful, you can see the branches and the spider web basically of what they tried to connect to or what they have connected to, as it relates to that instance. And the fifth lesson learned is that just-in-time access that Bob also talked about is maybe the single most critical thing that you're able to do if you're running virtual machines inside of Azure, the ability to create a process that says, I'm going to lock out everybody from being able to remote into the server, because that's the single biggest threat you have is somebody attacking using a known username and password or brute force attempts to log into your services, using that just-in-time access to keep things locked out, lock out all the ports, and grant specific access to specific people at a specific time. Using specific IP addresses is a huge difference maker in that security. Those are the 5 lessons I try to make sure everybody walks away with when we talk about Security Center. And again, I appreciate you guys let me jump onto the call and add those lessons.
Thanks, Dennis. And we definitely are going to have Q&A, and we'll stay on as long as you guys want. So if there are questions, concerns, issues, there's one that already pops into mind. I'll throw right out. I'll start the questions with to Dennis. As soon as Jeff's done with his overview. So go ahead, Jeff. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I assume everyone can see the screen at this point, perhaps? I flipped over control there.
I gotcha.
Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. I know our friends out west is still morning there. My name is Jeff Fowler. I'm the Federal Senior Cloud Strategist for Planet Technologies. I also have a heavy focus on the security side of the house these days as well. And just to echo some of Dennis's and Bob's comments earlier, just having the visibility into trillions of data, trillions of signals of bits of data across Azure Security Center is absolutely fantastic. I have. I'm very excited it's now available to our government clients. I've been working in the federal space for the past 11 plus years or so. So any tool or technology that can be brought to the table that it is free for use for the majority of the scenarios you're looking at and gives you actionable insights instead of just, a whole flood of data that you're like, well, what do I do with this? Is just hugely valuable for any customer. But for my part today, I wanted to talk about something that just recently became available within Microsoft's Cloud App Security product. There's now a conditional access app control feature. And this is really just a great way of gaining and taking advantage of all that conditional access you've spent, a fair amount of time crafting over user sessions and data and things like that, and be able to just take that as you configure it from Azure AD and drop it straight into Cloud App Security, which has never been available until just recently. So when you look at users and what they do, what they want to do, and how they want to do it, and where they want to do it from, it's always a balancing act. So you've really got to look at productivity versus protection. Make sure they can do what they need to do, but without stopping them, without stopping them from doing what they need to do. At the same time, make sure they do it in a secure manner. So as you look at the modern workplace, it's essential that you can enable users to work from any location, from any device, and grant them access to your cloud applications. And additionally, increased collaboration needs necessitate sharing your company's data externally. At the same time, you need to safeguard that information and resources as well. So what we need to do is really provide a flexible environment that allows you to determine how your organization's data can be accessed while balancing protection and productivity. And with Microsoft's Cloud App Security, delivering these capabilities in a holistic and integrated experience with conditional app access control, with native integration to Azure AD conditional access policies, it allows you to really have everything locked down from one point of perspective without having to go to 10 different places. I've got to configure it in Cloud App Security, I've got to configure it in Azure AD, I've got to configure it for my Azure systems and services in Office 365, which is, nobody wants to have to do that. So really anything to gain efficiencies and having one approach to how you approach security is just a fantastic tool and capability. So what this really means is it really empowers you to granularly define what risk means to you and your organization, and then really gain control and visibility of any user sessions that match those kind of definitions that you establish. So, for example, if a business to business or partner to partner or federal agency to other federal agency or state local government type entity collaboration, let's say a person in the organization wanted to have access to some of your data. And they want to try to access company confidential resources from an unmanaged device. So as a result of having this, you can actually block or encrypt the download of those resources in real time to prevent confidential information being leaking outside of your organization. And these controls can be applied to any SAML application configured with single sign-on in your organization, which is really just a fantastic capability. So moving on to a quick overview of what we're looking at here. Actually, let me go forward one. I'll come back to this in a moment. So when you talk about how does it work, I wanted to talk about an overview of Cloud App Security and how it functions across cloud discovery, data protection, and threat protection. So really, the framework itself focuses on finding out all the cloud use in your organization, including Shadow IT, reporting and control and risk assessment. And then from there, you want to be able to protect your data. So you want to be able to monitor and control it in the cloud and gain visibility into what's out there, enforcing your DLP policies, have alerting in place, and give your admins and security team the power to investigate anything that occurs. And the next piece of the puzzle is really threat protection, where you want to be able to detect anomalous use and security incidents. Much like we were talking about earlier in Azure Security Center, you want to have the ability to understand what's happening, where it's occurring, what data is being impacted, and be able to trace and follow the steps of the attackers so you know exactly what's happening with behavioral analytics and advanced investigation tools working on your behalf to help mitigate the risk and set policies and alerts to achieve maximum control of your network cloud data. So when you look at the access control for applications, what's actually happening is as traffic is sent through the reverse proxy to Cloud App Security, instead of directly to the application itself. So once you set up Cloud App Security so that it is aware of an application, you basically hit a plus sign, you integrate it. It's really simple and easy with the native APIs working behind the scenes on your behalf. And from that point forward, whenever people go to access your data or access those applications that you have managed in your organization, that's actually all that traffic is going through Cloud App Security. So all the relevant URLs and the JavaScripts and the cookies are actually replaced with the Microsoft Cloud App Security URLs. That way you're not having extraneous entities controlling the access and controlling the links and whatnot. You actually control all of that information, those flows. And this is great because this isn't just your organization's managed devices, your laptops and your workstations and your smartphones. This also applies to unmanaged devices as well. So no matter where someone's coming from, you still have the controls and policies set in place as per your organization's risk assessments and your risk controls and your risk posture, and applying it to any device someone's coming in from that remote partner organization's computers, or from someone's personal cell phone, or someone's home computer, for example. And there's a lot of applications already supported today as you look at these things. Across the board, such as Concur or Salesforce or Box. The big organizations and tools and services that your organization uses today that are integrated via SAML and have single sign-on capabilities, it really helps reduce the complexity overall while still protecting your users and your data. And when we talk about conditional access itself, it's really proactively managing your user sessions themselves. So while you're doing that, it really helps with looking at different user attributes, such as their identities or which group members they belong to, such as your Azure security groups, network security groups, for example, and then looking at what devices you're looking at here in terms of is this a domain join machine or is it a home computer? Is this compliant with our policies or not? What OS is this coming from? Is this a device that's been previously identified as being lost or stolen, or is it a bona fide, good, happy, no problem whatsoever computer? And then you can also look at applications as well. Per application policy. We talk about mobile apps or cloud apps, anything in between, as well as location. If someone's coming from your local networks in the office, that's fine. But if someone suddenly pops up from a country on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, that might be more of a cause for concern. And that's where the machine learning and behavioral analytics comes into play to say, hey, this might be a problem for us. It doesn't make any sense. So you can establish risk profiles to say, if someone's coming in from the local network, from on-premise, no problem, let them through, let them gain access to the systems without any problems whatsoever using single sign-on. But whereas if they're coming in from an unexpected location or, Bob just logged in from his account in his usual location he comes in from, and suddenly you see him pop in from overseas within an hour in a possible travel scenario, prompt them for multi-factor authentication. Make sure they are who they say they are, and they can validate that they need access to that system at that time. So when you pair those kind of conditions with your requirements, such as allow or block, or multi-factor authentication, or device enrollment, then you really get the ability to say what level of risk is acceptable and apply those conditional access policies to your users while maintaining complete control over your user sessions. So it really is a unique and new architecture that is available now. And with the integration with Azure AD conditional access, it really allows you to enforce access controls on your organization's applications based on certain conditions. So by defining who someone is and what applications they want to access, where they are, you can apply a conditional access policy. And once you determine the conditions, you can route all that traffic to Microsoft's Cloud App Security, where you can protect your data with the conditional access app control by applying access and session controls. With these, you can block on download, you can protect on download, you can monitor low trust user sessions, such as risky users when they sign in from places that isn't really normal, or just flat out block access to something that you determine, hey, this shouldn't be happening whatsoever. Or even saying, hey, this is perhaps okay, so maybe we'll just have a read-only mode instead. So there's really a lot of great things you can do here. And with session policies in place, you can control these user sessions and really make sure that everything is being handled in a way that you can accept from your organization's security policies and perspectives. And then the great thing is, with everything flowing through Cloud App Security, you can inspect the traffic for user activities. You can display the identified activities in the Microsoft Cloud App Security activity log. You can save the traffic logs and analyze them, such as porting them over to Azure Security Center if you wanted to. You can enable the admins to export the traffic logs to external SIM if you have one of those, as well as enforcing policies in the sessions themselves. At the same time, from a managed device identification perspective, you can really look at machines. Are there client certificates in place, or is it a domain join machine, or is it a compliant device? And then from there, you can look at these devices and make sure that the policies are in place and devices are compliant and ready to go based on what you need to do. And then a few additional comments with regards to supported apps and clients. Conditional access app control currently supports apps that are configured with SAML single sign-on in Azure AD, but this also supports applications that are configured with identity providers other than Azure AD. So if you're using something like Ping Identity or Okta or some other kind of SAML single sign-on experience in your organization, it doesn't preclude you from using Cloud App Security to make sure you can control your data and your users and your sessions. So it's really just a lot of great new features that have come to the table recently with having this in place and working on your behalf. So a few different scenarios with regards to this. So for, let's say you want to block or protect downloads from unmanaged devices. So what you can do there is it allows you, so the risk is you have an unmanaged device that potentially has a security gap, such as a lack of a PIN or passcode. Perhaps they've been downloading and sideloading applications on their device from outside of approved locations that are malicious. Or maybe they're coming in from a public Wi-Fi coffee shop that's completely unmanaged, not secured. That could potentially expose your sensitive company information as a result. So what you can do is you can actually create a policy that allows you to block the download of highly sensitive files in real time while accessing sanctioned company applications from an unmanaged device, which is a great means of controlling and protecting your data from people who may not be following good security practices. So another scenario, let's say you want to have a read-only mode in place for business-to-business users or organization. So the risk is when B2B users who need access to some data in your applications, limiting their actions is really essential. So you don't have control over their organization's security. You have no idea what their policies are with regards to antivirus or anti-malware or spam or patching or anything else like that. So what you can do is you can create a read-only mode for those users in your organization and blocking various in-app activities. That way they can't go and copy the information, or they can't download or do things like that as well, or make modifications. And then another common scenario is monitoring the use of sanctioned applications versus shadow IT apps. So from a risk perspective, so if you have an application that's sanctioned in your organization but presents some unknown risks, you can help by identifying via monitoring. So what you can do is you can monitor logins, file downloads, and various in-app activities in MCAS without restricting the actions the user can take. That way you know exactly what's happening, where it's happening, and on what device it's happening from, and allow them to do what they need to do and be productive, but while still maintaining your controls and your risk posture as well. And then let's say, for instance, you want to have, you want to be able to block access from unmanaged devices via client certificates. So the risk would be, the data stored in applications can be highly sensitive, such as in scenario 1, and should not be accessed from any BYOD machine. You want to make sure that only devices that have a valid client certificate, such as if from a US access perspective, you've got PIV cards and HSPD12 cards, CAT cards, those kind of things. And you've got the certificates loaded on there or loaded as a soft token or soft certificate on those devices. That's how you can identify users, make sure that the identities are correct, and those are cooperating as they should. So you can create a policy to block access to any application with sensitive information from any device without a valid client certificate. So that's another example of what you can do from a policy perspective to make sure that only users who come in from with valid client certificates are able to access the information. All right, and looks like sharing stopped for some reason there. But that is the information I wanted to cover today with regards to conditional access, Microsoft's Cloud App Security, and the new way of leveraging your conditional access policies from the MCAS itself. All right, back to you, Bob.
Yep, thanks. And I'm not sure what went on with the presentation right there, but if it comes back, great. If not, I'd actually like to we have a bunch of folks still on. I did promise we were going to get to Q&A, so I want to make sure there's time for Q&A. So I will kick things off with the question that I think everyone probably has in their mind, which is, I know Dennis and I both talked about some things being free and some things being not free with regards to Azure Security Center. So Dennis, did you want to pipe in with sort of what comes at no charge and what does have a cost and what are those costs?
Yep. So the security policy assessment and recommendations are included at no cost, so they're free. So being able to, from a policy assessment recommendations perspective, those components, you enable that, you get those recommendations, you see the assessment, you see the evaluation of security policy, the ability to connect to partner solutions. So we talked about, some of the partner solutions that exist, and I mentioned some of those, like again, from a firewall perspective, from a SIEM perspective, et cetera, are included in the free instance. The standard, the ability to have and again, I should point out, free covers any resources in Azure only. To evaluate resources that are in your hybrid environment on premise as well as the cloud requires a cost per node, as well as the additional solutions. So like just-in-time access, adaptive application controls, advanced threat detections for the networks, custom alerts, threat intelligence, etc. Are part of the standard offering, and it's $15 per node. So each node that you want to cover has that $15 per node per month that deprecates against your Azure commitment.
Okay, great. Does anybody out in the audience have questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask them.
I have a quick question, if you can hear me.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Go ahead, Tanya.
Okay, it was just do you have any kind of tools that can give you an estimate on costs? Meaning that since whenever we're doing our budgeting and foreseeing what we might want to do in the future, it's kind of hard to get an estimate without really getting quotes.
So you mean
you were talking about the $15 per node,
right,
for various different aspects. Do you have any kind of tool that has some of the other features that are available and costs behind those, or are we just talking about the one the nodes for that you were talking about for Azure? Additional security, any of the additional security features, or?
Well, the easiest way that when I work with customers trying to get pricing is by turning on the free component. Essentially, it helps you do that evaluation and assessment of the resources that you have currently. And when you enable that free component and you enable that initial assessment of those resources that you have, allows you to be able to create a profile. So there may be some instances that you're not overly concerned about up there, or that you're not looking to say, like, I have to have a certain level of security protection on. So it's going to give you the ability to basically see what you're currently doing, and then from there, once you kind of have an understanding of where you are, you can figure out where you're going. So that free component allows you to do that initial assessment, create some what I call security profiles, essentially deciding what are the things that are most significant for me, what are the things that I care about. And then there are tools if you want to evaluate from a hybrid perspective, if you're talking about also considering providing that same type of protection on servers that you're running on premise. There are some tools that Microsoft and Planet can work with you on, that you'd be able to run, that basically say, let me get an idea of how many servers I have. Again, apply that concept of profiling to them, and then from there be able to give you, like, this is what your cost per month would be to apply all these additional security capabilities and such to those. So it's something we would do jointly with you.
And to clarify, Tanya, also there is really just two tiers. It's either what I get for free or $15 per month per node. There's no other additional add-ons from any of the things that we've talked about. It's $15 for the extra services or free for the base services, and no other bolt-ons or add-ons, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. That's what I was trying to get at.
Okay, no problem.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
No, but everything else was good to know, because we really don't know. It would be more of a hybrid type of solution. Everything's pretty much on-prem, with the exception, of course, the AD user and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd kind of like to get an idea and just a sense of where we're at before we move forward. So everything you said was wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
Bob, can you speak to how the conditional access interacts or is a part of any multi-factor authentication requirements that may be in place?
Sure, and I'll start, and if Jeff, you want to pick up and add commentary, feel free. Um, so you build a set of rules, you have a set of rule sets or sort of scenarios. That's generally how we look at conditional access, right? And we're trying to build scenarios like from a known device, from a known network, like some of those kinds of things, and then also from, unknown networks, from unknown and risky networks, like maybe public Wi-Fi, maybe other countries, all of those things. So we have those kinds of things in place that we try to design for. Then the multi-factor authentication can be let's say a remedy or an action based on which one of those things you're in, right? So the idea is saying, okay, if you're coming from inside the internal network and I know your IP address, I'm not going to challenge you for multi-factor, right? But if you're coming from these unknown networks or risky ones or whatever you decide to be the bar for you as we build sort of a series of those coming from a device I don't know or any of those things, I can then suddenly challenge your multi-factor authentication. The other element would be, okay, go tying all these pieces together, because there are things that are going on that we've determined your account is risky, right? So the impossible travel scenario is the phrase that Jeff uses all the time that I love, which is it's impossible for me to have logged on at my, in my own office and then from China 2 hours apart. That's impossible, right? So if I see that happening, I can kick up a multi-factor authentication on that account, regardless of whether it's a known device or not, right? And I can decide whether I want to kick it off to anyone in that account or only from the impossible travel scenario side, way. So in other words, if I'm logged in my office and I'm also logged in China, I can choose to only prop China for multi-factor. Right, so it's just one of the remedies that also include blocking them entirely or some of the other things you could do. Does that answer your question?
It does, and just to confirm, that can be app-based or device-based, correct?
Or location-based or any of those series of things, okay, provided that Microsoft Cloud App Security is enabled and in place.
Yeah, so just imagine this as a series of if-then-else statements, where you can basically define if someone's coming from my on-premise network, let them on in, no problem whatsoever. If they're coming from anywhere else, prompt them for MFA. Those kind of things you can have in place, or versus, or based on devices, or based on identities, or based on client certificates, or any of the, it's a series of things and conditions you can set up and say, if they meet these requirements, allow them in as they would normally, but if they don't, prompt them from MFA to make sure they are who they say they are and coming from, a place that I should allow them from versus blocking.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, with that, I think we're going to wrap for the month. Remember that you can always reach out to your account team or anyone here, at Planet if you want to talk more about the solutions and offerings that we talked about today. And you can always, of course, just send a note to You Already Own It at go-planet.com, and you'll get the whole team and the right resource will get back to you right away. Thanks, everyone, for joining.